my name is Cara. I am 30 years old and I live in Scott County. My story begins, I guess, in 2013. I found out while my husband was on deployment that we were gonna welcome a baby that year, and so I was pretty excited, and I kind of kept it like a secret until he got back from deployment. And he got back from deployment when I was about 12 or 13 weeks, and so we had our first ultrasound together, and we kind of wanted to keep gender a secret, and so we didn't ask for what baby's gender was going to be. And so a few weeks later, at 18 weeks, I started to feel really nauseous on, it was December 11th of 2013. And I was sick and had a fever, and I just wasn't feeling good, and I knew that just wasn't normal for a pregnancy. And so he rushed me to the local emergency room, which was just down the hill from where we lived at, and they brushed us off and told him to just sit me in a wheelchair and they'll get to us when they get to us. And I just remember kept telling him I'm feeling really, really hot, and I passed out. And that was finally there, okay, let's bring her back into a room, just because obviously you don't want people looking at the pregnant girl passed out. And so they brought me back into a room, and they did a quick little ultrasound, and they were like, oh, everything's fine, you can go home. No like symptoms, nothing. It was just, we see baby's heartbeat, you know, everything's fine, go home. And I called the next day, because this was late at night, and I asked them, you know, can you please see me? And this was my normal OB's office. Can you guys get me in? I'm not feeling good. This isn't normal. Like, I'm looking up the symptoms on, you know, the internet, and it's showing really bad things, and I'm not feeling good. Please just see me. And I was told that I probably just had food poisoning, and that I'll be fine, but they can't fit me in, and obviously it's not urgent. So just hung up the phone. And you know, I was young, I was 22, and so I'm just sitting there thinking, okay, maybe they're right, and maybe I'll start feeling better. And so that night I wasn't feeling too bad, and so I was just trying to like calm myself down, you know. And the next morning, so December 11th of 2013, I woke up when my husband was going to work, and I had the worst pain in my stomach that I have ever felt, and I couldn't move. And I had this urge like just to push, and my husband carried me to the bathroom. And the second I sat down and pulled my pants down, it was just blood everywhere, and it wouldn't stop, and I don't remember leaving the apartment. My husband had to carry me, and my mom and my sister were there, into the car and get me to the local hospital again. And so they rushed me into the emergency room, and you know, my husband and my mom are like frantically telling people like, my daughter's bleeding, she's pregnant, please see her, please see her. And they put me in a room and shut the door, and my mom had to open the door, and she's like screaming at them like, you have to come to my daughter. And a doctor finally walks in and is pretty much like, why are you guys being so loud? And my mom pulls off the blanket that was on top of me, and it's just blood everywhere. And like all of this I'm getting secondhand because I don't remember any of it. By the time they hooked me up to monitors and were able to like check my cervix, they realized that my husband had to sign a form pretty much saying, if your wife dies today, you can't sue us. And so they hooked me up to an emergency blood transfusion, and they were just like, we'll see what happens to her, pretty much. I mean, it could have been resolved if they would have seen me in the first place when my husband rushed me in, or if they would have kept me overnight to see what was going on the first time I went in. But it was pretty much just a, oh well, sorry. If she lives, she lives. If she doesn't, she doesn't. And by the time they got me still passed out, and a nurse was tapping me on the cheek trying to get me to wake up. And I remember like a bunch of tapping, and I start to open my eyes, and the only thing I'm told to do is push. And I don't know what they mean by that. Like, I'm unaware of everything that's been going on. And so I'm trying to push, and I deliver my son. And I had no idea what was going on. I was just handed my son on top of my chest and told, it happens, and they left the room. And so like I'm on all these pain medications. I'm still hooked up to a blood transfusion. I'm getting all these antibiotics, and I'm like waking up to, you know, my son on my chest, and that's it. It was the worst experience I think a mother can ever go through, you know, giving birth to your child dead and not realizing what exactly is going on. And then the fact that I survived and he didn't. That is something that still plays a big part in my life, you know, 7 years from now, to this day, and something that I wish I could go back and push more and have told them, no, you need to see me. No, maybe found a different hospital, because I truly believe if I would have been seen that day, he would have still been here, or he would have at least had a fighting chance at being, you know, a micro preemie and having some fight, you know. But his life was taken because nobody wanted to talk to me. They thought that me saying I'm in pain and all these, you know, I'm in pain, I have a fever, I'm not feeling good, to them it was just me complaining. But it wasn't. It was my son's life, and that was taken away from me and him, you know, because someone felt that my needs weren't good enough to be seen for. And obviously I was being dramatic, you know. It's your first pregnancy, you don't know. But I know my body well enough to know that something bad was happening. So when it happened, I wasn't shocked, because I knew. Like, I knew those 2 days that something was going to happen if nobody wanted to see me. And so sadly, my son's life, you know, was what was taken from me and taken from him. I saw him was at the funeral home before they, you know, cremated him for me. Why do you think I'm depressed? My child was taken away from me. I think I have every right under the sun to want to be depressed, you know, like, and it was just, well, we don't know what happened. I'm sorry it happened. I can't figure it out. So if you get pregnant again, I'll see you. And I was just hushed away like a number. And that's how I felt in her office, was I was just a number. I wasn't a person. My son wasn't a person. I was a number to her. And it didn't matter that my baby had died. It was just, oh, well, I'll see you when I see you. And that to me still rings in my head to this day, was we're not numbers. You know, we're mothers, we're women, and our babies matter, because that's a life. And if you cannot take that life seriously, my life seriously, then maybe you shouldn't be in this profession, because my son lost his life because someone didn't care. And I almost lost my life because people didn't care. And to me, it's just more people need to look into this and need to want to be there to help us, because no one was there to advocate for me. I was there by myself with, you know, my mom and my husband and my sister, and they were the only ones there. And if they weren't there, would I be here? If I had no one at my house to drive me there, I wouldn't. And so if you don't have yourself or a family member there with you, it's almost as if you're non-existent. Like, I felt like I wasn't seen. I wasn't a person anymore. I was just a presence there that wasn't wanted. And so when I got pregnant with my second son, 3 months later, we still had no cause as to why we lost our son. It was just, it happens. And it doesn't just happen. Like, the way it happened for us, it doesn't happen. There's a reason. And so we were scared, but optimistic that maybe it wouldn't happen again. And so at about 18 weeks again, when we lost our first son, Malik, I started to have these cramping feelings, and things just weren't feeling right again. And so I brought it up, and I was told again, there's nothing wrong. Now you're just in your head because of what happened. And so I'm sitting there like, and here it goes again. You know, I'm being pushed aside. My feelings aren't being valid. So we go in for an ultrasound, and I remember the ultrasound tech over my stomach, and then at one point she put it down and walked out of the room. And I just looked at my husband like, I know something's wrong. Like, she didn't say anything. She put it down, turned her monitors off, and left the room. And I just started bawling my eyes out, because I know something's wrong, but I don't know what. And so they tell us, please go upstairs to the room and someone will be in to talk to you. And I'm like, that's all you're gonna give me right now? Like, I need to know what's going on. And so I go up into the room and I'm crying, and I'm sure everyone can hear me at this rate. And the OB didn't even have like the decency to come in and talk to me about what was going on. She sent a nurse in who was the same nurse that dismissed me with Malik. And she told me that They figured out why we lost our first son, and I have what's called an incompetent cervix. And so it's where your cervix dilates prematurely. And I had no cervix left, and I was 4 centimeters with 0.09 millimeters left, and that I needed to go home and prepare to lose my son, and that if by any chance they could find somebody local that would be able to place what's called a cervical cerclage, which is where they stitch your cervix shut, they would let me know. But it'll be really rare that somebody will place it at 22 weeks. So all I can do is go home and see what happens. And I remember leaving that office hysterical. Like, you just told me again to go home and lose my second son, and you're not even trying to help me. You couldn't even come in and talk to me about what was going on. It was just as if, I was just another number, and my baby was another number to her. It didn't matter at that point. And I had to call every hospital I could think of locally, and nobody would take me. I was too much of a risk at that point. And I just remember in my head thinking, there has to be somewhere that will take me. There has to be somewhere that will try to save my son. And a hospital answered the phone, and I was crying and sobbing, and the lady was like, "Please calm down, can you tell me what's going on?" And so I explained everything to her, and she asked me to be put on hold for a second, and it was probably like a 15-second hold, but it felt like hours. And when she answered back, she told me to pack a bag and to come there as fast as I can. And I had so much like relief lifted off my shoulders that somebody cared about my baby, that somebody wanted to save him. And so we rushed out, and this hospital was 2 hours away from where we lived. And so when we get there, they go through everything with me, and they were upfront. We can place this rescue cerclage, but we have a chance of breaking your water, and there is risk of infections and all these things. And I didn't care at that point. I just wanted my son to have a fighting chance at life, because my son Malik, he didn't get that. It was taken from him, and not by my choice or his choice. It was just ripped away from us. And so to be able to give my son Talon a fighting chance, I signed that right away. And so I lived at the hospital for 2 weeks, and they placed my cerclage, and my cervix, shut, and I was able to gain just a little bit of leeway to get him as close as to like a survival rate as possible. And so I was sent home on strict bed rest. I could only get up and go to the bathroom or grab something to eat and lay back down. And so I got to 28 weeks, and I started bleeding. And so I rushed back to the same hospital that placed my cerclage. I had been seeing them every week, so they were super on top of everything with him. And at that point, they were too scared to send me home. And so I lived at the hospital for 7 weeks, from 28 weeks until I had my son at 33 weeks, due to my cervix, and then I had a premature rupture of my membrane. And so he came into the world at 33 weeks, but he came into the world unresponsive. And so they had to bring him back, and they rushed him down to the NICU, where he spent a month there. My son was born with a grade 1 brain bleed. He had apnea and bradycardia, and he needed temperature regulation. He had jaundice, and he needed a feeding tube because he couldn't eat on his own orally. And it's not typical of babies at that gestation to have problems going on, but because of everything that happened during my pregnancy and him being so low the entire time, it just caused a lot of trauma to him. And he spent 4 weeks there in the NICU, and then he was able to come home. And that was probably the most amazing moment ever, to actually bring my son home. But it also reminded me of everything that I had lost with my first son. One of those like bittersweet moments. I'm bringing my baby home, but I should have 2 here, and I don't. I remember the entire time I'm like waiting for a phone call from her. Like, is she gonna call me to apologize? Is she gonna call me just to see how my baby's doing? And I got nothing. No phone calls, no sympathy, no, I'm really sorry this happened, but I'm happy that he's alive. it was so just harsh. Again, it was just, I was, whisked out of her office and she didn't have to deal with me ever again. And I did get a phone call about coming in for a 6-week postpartum, and I declined that. Like, I didn't want to see her at that point. She'd taken something so precious from me, and then she robbed me of 2 amazing pregnancies I could have had if she would have just listened to me when I needed her to listen and just to care. But there was no care, there was no concern. It was just, there's a shell of a person and she's on my payroll, so I'll entertain her while she's here, but when she's not here, I don't have to deal with her anymore. And so all I live with now is an urn of my first son and my second son and my daughter, who I now have. And she was delivered, by a non-Caucasian OB, and he cared so much the entire pregnancy. He was on top of everything. He listened to me. Anytime I had a concern, it was a call or an email right away. If I wanted to be seen for an extra ultrasound, I was seen for an extra ultrasound. And I made it to 38 weeks with her, where I've only ever made it as far as 33. And so my daughter was full term, and having that care and looking back at the care that I got with my 2 sons, it's disgusting, honestly. It's just sickening to see the difference in care that you get, and the fact that with one man, he cared so much about her, and it wasn't his baby, but it was his job, and he cared for both of us like we were a family member. Whereas with my son and my daughter, or with my 2 sons, it was just push us to the side because we didn't matter. And even if the waiting room had nobody in there, she'd never had the time to listen to me, or the time. It was always some excuse to get out of the room, or to not come into the room, and to send a nurse into the room. And it's sad that in 2021, it's still a thing, and it's still happening, but people don't want to open their eyes and see that it is.